Hi, everybody. This is Carin Andersen with Think Aorta US. We are so excited to have all of you here with us today for our very first Think Aorta Global Meetup. Gareth, you want to take this away?
Fantastic. Thanks, Carin. I'm Gareth Owens. Welcome, everybody. Here we are running this from two sides of the Atlantic today. We have people joining us from about 12 countries around the world who are all united in a common purpose, which is you're interested in Think Aorta and you'd like to do something about saving lives in acute aortic dissection. So that's what the next hour is going to be about. We have a great panel from around the world to give you a perspective on what Think Aorta is and who's doing what with it, where they work, in which countries. And we hope that we will inspire and inform you in equal measure this evening to Think Aorta and to promote the campaign and get involved wherever you happen to be. So thank you for joining us. And I'm just going to really quickly whiz around the panel so you know who's here. So you've met Carin Andersen, who is a very good friend of mine, who is the patient lead for Think Aorta in the US. Also, we've got with us ladies first. So Dr. Grace Mulatti from Sao Paulo in Brazil is leading on Think Aorta Brazil. We've got Jill Byrne from Royal Victoria Hospital in Northern Ireland. And Jill's going to tell us about the work she's done teaching staff to Think Aorta in Northern Ireland. We've got Jordi Martorell from Spain, from Barcelona, who's going to be talking about the work he's doing to bring Think Aorta to Spain. We've got Simon Rose from here in the UK, who is our Think Aorta pre-hospital lead. And Simon's going to talk about teaching paramedics to Think Aorta. And we go back to the US, we've got Dr. Ben Youdelman from New York, who is an aortic surgeon and clinical lead for Think Aorta in New York. And I can see him, I don't know whether you can, but we've got Greg Greenberg, who is another patient from Think Aorta US. So Greg's with us too. So, so fantastic panel to give you a lot of different perspectives on Think Aorta. And Carin and I think between each agenda item, there will be a short pause while the screen is rearranged so you can see the speakers. So if you see a splash screen for a moment, don't worry. That just means we're transitioning to the next segment of the agenda. And I think we're going to do that right now so that I can talk about the background and aims of the global Think Aorta campaign. So let me just give you a little bit of background to where do you Think Aorta come from and what's it all about? Back in 2015, a group of patients who'd survived an aortic dissection kind of got together on Facebook. I wasn't one of them because I hadn't dissected at that point, but a small group got together and they started to talk. They talked about three things. They talked about how lucky they were to have survived an aortic dissection. They talked about the fact that it seemed to them that a lot of people in the medical profession weren't aware of aortic dissection and that there wasn't a good knowledge of the condition because it was rare and poorly understood. And they talked about the fact that probably because of that lack of awareness, there weren't many people like them who were making it and surviving. And a lot of people seemed to be losing their lives in the UK, where this group was, because there wasn't enough awareness to Think Aorta and to get patients who are having an acute aortic dissection rapidly diagnosed and transferred to a specialist centre for life-saving surgery. So this small group of patients kind of started talking about this and saying, it became part of their language to say, wouldn't it be good if more people could Think Aorta? And this was the conversation they were having back in 2015 and into 2016. How could we get more people to Think Aorta? And I met them in 2016. They held the first ever Aortic Dissection Awareness Day UK in London. And there was just a small group of us. And again, we carried on the conversation. How do we get people to Think Aorta? And how do we get people not just to think about a heart attack, but when a heart attack is ruled out, to think about aortic dissection? And eventually, in 2017, at the second Aortic Dissection Awareness Day UK, it had really become quite a hot topic at Think Aorta. And one of our very good friends, who was the director of a charity called Heart Research UK, stood up and spoke at the event and said, every emergency department needs a poster that says on it, Think Aorta, because that will trigger people to make the differential diagnosis. And that's where the poster campaign was born back in September 2017. So we as a group spoke to Heart Research UK, who very generously agreed to fund the poster campaign. We got the support of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine to produce the clinical content and to design it, and the Society for Cardiothoracic Surgery here in the UK. And in April 2018, we launched a podcast. If you haven't listened to the Think Aorta podcast, it's on the website. It's about 20 minutes, and it will give you a real insight into practically what Think Aorta is about, because it features a patient whose life was saved by a junior doctor thinking aorta, a bereaved relative who sadly lost a parent who was misdiagnosed, an emergency medicine consultant, and a cardiac surgeon talking about how to get the pathway right by thinking aorta. So do listen to the podcast. We launched the podcast. It rapidly became the most downloaded podcast ever from the Royal College of Emergency Medicine. And we sent a tube of 10 posters to every emergency department in the UK and Ireland. Something amazing happened. We started getting people sending photographs in, showing where they'd put their posters, showing their team posing with a poster after they'd been trained to think aorta, people talking about the training events they were running, people saying, I went and put one on the door of radiology so that they know to give me a CT scan when I ask for it. All kinds of things were happening. And we started getting invited to conferences and exhibiting as Think Aorta there and speaking about Think Aorta there. So the movement grew, and we always said here in the UK, if Think Aorta saves one life, it will all have been worth it. And we are now 4 or 5 years on in a position where we know people whose lives have been saved by Think Aorta. We know the people who've been, where the doctor has seen a poster and has thought aorta when they may not otherwise have suspected it. And that's tremendously encouraging. So we're seeing evidence that Think Aorta is working. We're seeing evidence that the number of emergency dissection surgical cases is on the rise. And we've got the surgical capacity to deal with that. We're seeing a lot of action around the country here to improve the acute pathway, so that diagnosis is made more quickly. CT scans, the barrier to CT scanning is lowered. The transfer to the specialist centre is expedited. All of these things are flowing out of the Think Aorta campaign, and it's really very exciting to see. So Think Aorta it's not an organisation. We don't have an office. We don't employ any staff. It's a movement, and the resources that we have on the website are really our gift to the world, because what we want to do is save the lives of patients in acute aortic dissection everywhere in the world where this problem is occurring. And we think it is a worldwide problem. And a lot of the people on the call tonight have confirmed that and told us that, yes, there is a need for healthcare professionals to think aorta where we live, where we work, in order to save the lives of these patients. So that's what Think Aorta is. It's free resources. It's a movement. There's no central organization. There's no central funding. Think Aorta is what we make it and what we do with it in our countries. We have some very simple guidelines and a very simple model for rolling it out into countries. But tonight we'll hear some of the exciting things that people have been doing with Think Aorta where they live and work. So our aim is quite simple: save lives in acute aortic dissection. The message is quite simple: Think Aorta, CT scan to confirm the diagnosis. That's what we are about. And in the UK, we estimate that if we get this right, if we get this pathway right in every ED, we can save 1,000 lives a year. That's just in the UK. And you multiply that around your countries and your population, and Think Aorta, if we get it right around the world and roll it out, we're talking about tens of thousands of lives a year that we could save with this very simple, very compelling campaign. So that's why we're here, and we're really glad that you've joined us to share in the campaign tonight and to learn about it. I'm actually ahead of time, but I think that's all I want to say. So what I'm going to do is, actually, there's one more thing, which is having done the UK and Ireland, and we're still active, we're still doing lots of other things, but we were approached by some good friends in the US who said, we want to do Think Aorta in the USA. And we thought, well, that's a big challenge. It's a big country with a lot more people than we've got in the UK. But I'm delighted that tonight we're partnering with the Think Aorta US team who took the campaign and are going to tell you what they did with it and how they formed Think Aorta US. So transition for a moment to Ben and Carin. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gareth. Again, this is Carin Andersen, and I'm with Think Aorta US, and with me is Dr. Ben Youdelman. And we're so excited because we did go into this initially as part of a couple other organizations as a working group to help spread this message. And very quickly, we realized that to be more effective in reducing the barriers that we might find here in the United States, it made sense for us to become an actual nonprofit organization that is primarily led by patients and their caregivers as well. So I think one of the first things we recognize is that we're very different than how things happen in the UK and Ireland. We do not have one central hospital system. So every hospital system is in competition with every hospital system. So we realized that the people that we needed to have on board to endorse us were the societies that all of these systems and its employees might be part of. And we decided to initially hit the ground running with the poster campaign, since that is what was so successful before. Why reinvent the wheel? So we did that, and we were able to have these posters delivered to about 5,000 emergency room departments, 5,000 hospitals, 2 posters each. That was very exciting. And then we followed up with attending conferences that were specific for the societies that were endorsing us. And we thought it made the most sense to have survivors there on the ground, speaking with the physicians, speaking with the medical professionals, to just share with them our experiences as survivors and how important it was to have the timeliness, the sense of urgency, the proper diagnosis. But even with that, I think what we realized is talking with somebody who does this day in and day out really isn't our target base. It was what we needed to do was deputize those individuals to take this message back to their hospitals, back to their own ED departments, as well as take it to the hospitals that will then transfer patients to them. So that was the goal in what we did there. And then, of course, COVID hit. So when COVID hits, how do you go into a hospital? You just don't. So everything kind of ceased to exist from that standpoint. But I think what happened for us is we realized that there is a greater message involved in the Think Aorta campaign. And it was through numerous conversations with our board and the guidance of working with Dr. Youdelman that we discovered this messaging. And Ben, I think you're the best suited to take us into what that next stage has been.
Well, thank you, Carin, and certainly Gareth. I appreciate even just being part of it. I'm always humbled by people who have been through this, whether they be my patients, and working with the two of you who are clearly powerhouses, both from just a personal level and in terms of carrying this forward. Carin points out sort of the obvious stuff that we needed to do to both commit to the organization in the UK, as well as to start the messaging here. But what we ran into is exactly what Carin's pointing out. And I'd like to go through a couple of the results of the challenges, because of course, a challenge without a solution is just a bad day. So we did wind up making tremendous connections through these professional organizations by going there or contacting them and really just raising awareness with these people, which of course are my people and others, and having really good conversations with the medical societies to, as Carin said, deputize surgeons like me to figure out how to best implement this, because we all are frustrated by the classic story of the delays of diagnosis, and of course, this can lead to disastrous outcomes. Now, COVID has had some very, very negative effects on a lot of things, and those don't need to be belabored, but I will tell you a couple of very positive things and how it hit this campaign in the US. And the most important thing that occurred is this pure, unadulterated boredom that occurred in my life while I was the sole standing surgeon, as two of my partners were sick with COVID. Two of them were over the age 65. One of them was managing things at other hospitals. And that basically left me to cover the disasters as they were occurring in my hospital, formerly being covered by 6 surgeons. And what happened was that there was a tremendous lack of attention of patients to their health care. And it left me sitting there trying to figure out what to do. So I had nothing else to do. And I scoured the CAT scans that were being performed and have completed a research study, which I'm working on publishing, which showed that the incidence of aortic aneurysm, heretofore thought to be relatively low, may be as high as 14% in the general population, that I found in over 1,500 CAT scans that were obtained through a very heterogeneous population in New York City. And this prompted a different conversation with Carin and with Gareth and with all these other people saying, wait. We're talking about aortic dissection, but we know that aortic dissection can occur in the presence of aortic aneurysms, but it can also occur without the presence of an aortic aneurysm. And this taken together points to what we know is a genetic predisposition. And while the world has gone a tremendous down a very complex pathway since the sequencing of the human genome, which I believe was completed in 1998 or 99. But the complexities of the sequencing of the human genome is that when I was in medical school, we had about 5 or 6 genetic things that can cause aortic aneurysm and dissection, and now we're broaching 40. Who's to say that in another 20 years we won't be at hundreds? And the concern, of course, is that the message of Think Aorta is what we really need to say. And all the genetic predispositions and testing and all of the other things we can do is wonderful, and we're going to learn a lot of things. But it's more important to have the family history of aortic aneurysm, aortic dissection, and some of the associated diseases, namely cerebral aneurysm, bicuspid aortic valve, coarctation, these things that are well documented and well appreciated. Getting that out there such that families can start having a conversation. And what better time to have that conversation than when you're completely cooped up because there just happens to be a global pandemic going on. So here we are with this message, and we have this fantastic verbiage that is very clear, what I kindly refer to as the got milk for aortic disease. And we can take this and transition it to the patients and tell them, communicate with your families. Tell them about your aortic aneurysm. Tell them what really happened to grandpa. Tell them all of these things. Don't keep it close to your chest and be scared. Communicate with everybody and tell them. And in my office, that is the #1 message that we try to get out there, that your family history of aortic disease is your unfortunate potential medical history, but that if we find this out, not only can we treat the aortic aneurysm, but there's no question that early intervention in a much safer operation can avoid an aortic dissection. So it dovetails with the message that has always been part of Think Aorta, but it also helps us to deal with the other aspects of aortic disease.
Excellent.
So, and on top of that, there's a lot of exciting things that we're working on, because as Ben mentioned, when you are cooped up during a global pandemic, you have a lot of exciting ideas, but we are really focusing on what will help to drive the message home in the best direction that we can do that. So from the individuals that work on Think Aorta that are survivors, some of us cross paths with another nonprofit organization, and we are in the community every day. So we have the ability to talk to patients, survivors, and caregivers to really help push this message from a grassroots effort, boots on the ground, everybody they talk to, passing out folders. if we have friends that go to the ER for a broken foot, here's a folder, take it in to talk about Think Aorta. So there's never a missed opportunity. And I think what we're finding as the survivors, talking to other members of the community, is it is being very well received and very well embraced. We're receiving pictures like you were as well of people wearing T-shirts, of people posting posters. We've had masks. So a variety of ways to help reinforce the importance of the message and also drive home that hashtag Think Aorta, Think Family. So we're really excited to work with all of you to see where we can move this for the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Carin. I'm very excited about what's going on in the US, but there's a nice link there for me with this Think Aorta, Think Family business, because I did in my introductory remarks talk about healthcare professionals being aware to Think Aorta. But of course, it's important for patients with a history of aortic disease to be aware as well. And as Ben was speaking, I thought to myself, yeah, that was me. So I come from a family that has Marfan syndrome, which predisposes us to aortic dissection. And my father died of an aortic dissection when I was 11 years old. He was 49. And so I was very aware that I had a risk, and I was aware from a very early age of what the symptoms of aortic dissection were, and that I should go to the ED straight away if I ever had them. And so I suppose I was quite unusual in the population at the time to know that. And sure enough, around the same age as my father, I was in the middle of London, in a pub, and I had an acute aortic dissection. And because I was aware, I was able to say to my friend, call an ambulance and tell them, I think I'm having an aortic dissection. So the paramedics who came out to me in the pub in London were faced with a patient saying, I have Marfan syndrome and I think I'm having an aortic dissection. And that's probably what saved my life. And there's a nice link in that to our next speaker, who is a paramedic from here in England, who has taken on the challenge of teaching paramedics to think aorta. So I made the paramedics' job easy that night in 2016, Simon, but perhaps you can tell us what you've been doing to teach paramedics to think aorta. Simon Rose from the East of England Ambulance Service.
Thanks, Gareth. Yeah, for one thing I can say is I can guarantee that not every patient will make it that easy. So with that in mind, what basically I've been doing over the last 2 to 3 years is, as Gareth said, has been teaching paramedics to think aorta. My journey with the campaign really started in 2018 when I kind of almost accidentally stumbled upon a Think Aorta session within my local ED. I was on my regional placement, just doing a rotation in the emergency department as part of my core training, and I was invited to attend. I thought this would be really interesting, and what I attended was very unexpected. It was grounded in a real life human story, which I found inspiring and also unusual as well, because as healthcare professionals, we often get a very professional type of training, and sometimes the human element can be lost. And I found that really inspirational. So I reached out. I thought this is something that actually we come across in the pre-hospital setting. Yes, we don't have the diagnostic tools such as a CT, but often these patients will come across our pathway. There's not too many that will self-present to the emergency department potentially. And so I touched base with the Think Aorta campaign, highlighted that I think this is a great opportunity. And fortunately, they were happy to have me on board. So together, over 2018, 2019, we created a core kind of content to deliver to pre-hospital clinicians compared to the emergency department. Obviously, there were some key differences there. And then it was the beginning of 2019. We had our first pre-hospital lecture at the University of East Anglia, which is my local university. So basically, we had a trial there. And since then, we have now become a kind of a core accredited part of their course. So every student paramedic that goes through that university will have a Think Aorta session as part of their training. So, for example, this year there's a cohort of 70. So every cohort will have about similar numbers. Within the first year, we had about 150 paramedics trained as part of that core process. Then in obviously 2020, we had a continuation of that, but also we created or assisted and created some guidelines for pre-hospital clinicians as well. So I was a part of a group of 6 that consulted on the JR Calc guidelines, and obviously not everyone will be aware of JR Calc, but that is basically the national guidelines for pre-hospital clinicians within the UK. So now there is much more standardised guidance on the symptoms and management of these patients in the pre-hospital setting, where before there was no guidelines for a universal approach. Obviously then COVID, as we've kind of commented on, impacted a lot of the work we're doing, but I think as now we are, fingers crossed, seeing a bit more of the brightness and the light at the end of that tunnel, we've really kicked off the kind of campaign again in the UK and in the pre-hospital setting. So within the last couple of months, me and Gareth have been working quite closely to develop a universal core set of kind of lectures and slides that can now be implemented regionally around the country. So we're having contact with people in Wales. Tomorrow I will be sending out an invitation for training in Scotland. And to date, so from our initial consultation, I would say in 2018, we have trained roughly about 500 pre-hospital clinicians, which compared to obviously when we started and this was being delivered to emergency departments is a significant figure. And that is only going to increase as we progress. So I feel quite proud actually when I was thinking what to say tonight, and that actually where we started to where we are, and I hope we can obviously continue that moving forward. So thank you for the invitation to speak, and I'll pass you back to Gareth.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon, for joining us, and thank you for all your sterling work. I mean, 500 pre-hospital clinicians on the road knowing to think aorta is going to make a huge difference. And I know we've also tackling this concept of getting the module adopted as part of a degree program, so that anybody in the future who comes through that education program is automatically taught to think aorta. These are the things that start to change perceptions and awareness on a national level. I really wanted Simon to share that with you, just so you get a sense of the things you can do. If you've got questions or comments as we go through, please use the chat, and we will collate those. And when we get to 45 minutes into the program, we will start having the panel answer your questions. So feel free to type some questions in the chat. We'd like to hear them. Our next speaker is another example of excellence in teaching Think Aorta, and I'm delighted that she can join us. I know she's not long finished her shift, so I'm so grateful that she's come and joined us this evening. And it's Jill Byrne from the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast in Northern Ireland, which is, you can tell us what it is. It's a big ED and a big major trauma centre. But again, Jill's been doing some great work with Think Aorta over in Northern Ireland, and I'm really glad that she's come to tell us about it this evening. Jill, let's transition to you, please.
Hello, everybody. My name's Jill Byrne. I'm an advanced clinical practitioner in emergency care in the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast. So thank you so much for inviting me to take part in this meeting tonight. And thank you, Gareth, for inviting me. Gareth had wanted me to talk about a quality improvement project that we are running in Belfast. And like yourselves, I'll give you a little bit of background. So my interest in aortic dissection actually began about 10 years ago when I actually lost my father to acute aortic dissection. Then around about 2.5 years ago, we had a serious adverse incident in the Royal, where unfortunately we lost a patient. And being involved in the review meeting around that, we talked and people said, no, but this happens, it's happened before, it's probably going to happen again, it's very rare. And we talked around it and discovered that there was a tool out there. I don't know if you guys are aware of this. There is a risk tool called the Aortic Dissection Detection Risk Score. Yeah, some of you may have heard of it. So we thought, right, let's start with that. And let's try and make our clinicians aware that this tool is out there and it groups the features of your background history, for example, your Marfan's, connective tissue diseases. It reminds you to ask about these things in the history, family history of sudden death, the quality of the pain, and then your clinical examination. So reminding people to check various features of the clinical examination, which they may not do routinely in a very quick consultation in the ED. So then I discovered your resources, the Think Aorta resources online, and thought, this is brilliant. We could put these up all around the department. And basically everything that is on your poster is what is contained in this ADDRS risk tool, and directs the clinician to Think Aorta and to put all those bits together. So that was great. So we started that, and if I tell you we started that in February last year, you'll understand what happened. COVID hit us in March, so we didn't get too far with that. So we started up, we put the posters up, we basically did a little bit of awareness raising, learning nuggets at medical handover in the morning, and tried to encourage people to think aorta. But by the time we got to August, everybody was just so tired and so exhausted with COVID. Nobody really had the energy to pick up on a QI project and move it forward until our staff changed. So our staff changed in August, and when they changed, we formed a team, found some interested parties and formed a team. I do a lot of simulation teaching on advanced life support, and lo and behold, we got a senior clinical fellow. I have to shout out to Ronan O'Neill, who enjoys simulation training. So we decided between us, well, this might be a good way. We do an awful lot of simulation training on very common conditions that present to the ED. Why not take it that step further and do a lot of chest pain simulations, but let's put aortic dissection in there. So that's what we've been doing. We've been doing those as multidisciplinary sessions, so involving the nursing staff right from triage. So side by side with that, Katrina, one of our nursing sisters who's on our team, she has done an awful lot of nurse training. She's got over 100 staff in the department trained, and that's everybody from band 3 up to band 8A. Teaching sessions on what is an aortic dissection, how would you recognise it if your patient is in triage, what questions should you ask, what would raise your suspicions. So then when we came to doing the multidisciplinary simulations, we incorporated that in. So we will get a nurse and we will give a scenario. The nurse will then triage that patient, escalate concerns to the junior doctor, and then we run the simulation along those lines. We even actually, one of the ones we run, you know, to get to the stage where I think it might be an aortic dissection, I need a CT aorta, but they can't get a CT aorta because there's 2 traumas waiting to go up before for the CT. So it's quite good in that way because it's making people think. So we've done quite a lot with this. We try to do it monthly, and we try to get 3 to 4 people through every month. It can be difficult because you can't always get the space to run the scenarios. The department is sometimes too busy and you can't take a space in resus. So we have to be pretty careful about when we try to book our sessions, but we're trying to get as many people as possible through. We've now engaged with radiology as well, and they are very enthusiastic about coming on board. We want to look at what is the threshold for ordering CT aorta and let them know that we are doing this training in our department, and therefore the demand for scans may well go up. But that's fine. That's fine. So we need to work with them on that. We've also reached out to critical care. We have an intensive care registrar who's coming to join us on the team, a vascular colleague and also a cardiac colleague. So I think really the only way that this project is going to go is get bigger and bigger and run and run. And what we're hoping is that some of our senior registrars, as they move around from hospital to hospital, and also some of our junior doctors, will take the project and move it from hospital to hospital so that we spread the word right across Northern Ireland. And I'm hoping that even by speaking here this evening, I don't know what other hospitals are doing this kind of simulation, if any, but we think it's a very effective way of getting the message across. And we're very happy to share our work with anybody who is interested. Is there anything else I need to tell you? No, I think that's about it. Just, I do want to say a thank you to Dan Burgess for giving me all these lovely contacts. Thank you, Dan, and for allowing me to get into the position tonight where I can spread the word of what we're doing, and hopefully it will help others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill. And we're so pleased that you've joined us to share that, because it's so practical, and the reason I really wanted you to come and talk about that tonight was, it's one thing to go into an ED and do Think Aorta, put a poster up, but what we need to be doing is embedding Think Aorta in the way that you've done, so that as staff change, that message isn't lost, and that people are routinely educated as they move around and spread the word around. And I've met with clinicians now in hospitals who said to me, oh, I want to bring Think Aorta to this ED because I learned it in my ED previously when I was a junior doctor, and I want to take it with me to where I go. So so building a model that continually trains people is really important to spread this message, and it's a great example of it. Thank you, Jill.
You're welcome.
Okay, cool. So we're keeping nicely to time. I'm sure there will be some questions about what you've done, so we'll have some coming in on the chat shortly. But we're going to, that's kind of, those two sessions from Simon and Jill were to make you think, how could I do Think Aorta where I work? If you're in an ED or if you're in pre-hospital, how could I do that? The next thing we want to do is kind of take it up a level. And we're in discussion with a lot of people who want to bring the Think Aorta campaign to their country, like Ben and Carin brought it to the US. So we're going to transition again, and I'm going to introduce you to two people from very different parts of the world who want to bring Think Aorta to their country, and they're going to tell you how they're going about it and why. So if we transition, and perhaps we can put Grace and Jordi on the screen at the same time, please, Joe. So it's a great pleasure to talk about Think Aorta country model, and we've got a very simple model, so I don't have much to say about it. If you want to bring Think Aorta to your country, we have free resources. We have a global website, thinkaorta.net, where you will find those resources. The first thing we ask is that you talk to us, because we can probably help you, and we do like to know which countries are doing Think Aorta. So email, Twitter, Facebook, just contact us and say, I want to bring Think Aorta to my country. And in response to that, you will get two things. You will get a copy of the brand guidelines, just to tell you what you can and cannot do with the Think Aorta brand. Think Aorta is a registered trademark, so we do like people to ask us and get permission to use it. And the second thing you'll get is a country implementation guide. It just tells you where to start. And what are the first things you should do to get a Think Aorta campaign running in your country? And it's a very short guide, it's just a page or two, but it gives you all the key tips from people who've done it before. So that's the model, really. And we don't look to control what countries are doing. What we like to do is build a team for the country of people that we trust, who will go and roll out Think Aorta in the way that is best for their healthcare system, because people in the country understand the healthcare system far better than we do, and it'll be different in each country. So we like to trust people who know the country and its healthcare system. So that's how to get started. I'm going to hand over now to Grace and to Jordi in turn. Dr. Grace Molati is a vascular surgeon from Sao Paulo in Brazil, and we've been talking for a couple of months, I think, about Think Aorta Brazil, and Grace and some of her colleagues have formed a team to take Think Aorta to Brazil. And I know we and an awful lot of doctors in Brazil are very excited about what you're doing. So Grace, would you like to tell us something about it?
Yes. Thank you, Gareth. Thank you so much for your invitation to be here today as we join this global campaign that's been around for so many years now. So I think we still have time to join it, right? Because we're probably getting bigger now. and hopefully COVID won't keep us in the way for many years. So so what we have so far, me and André Brito from Salvador in Bahia, we've been gathering people to join us. And as Brazil, we were discussing challenges in Brazil, and I think some of the challenges are equivalent to those in US probably, because of the size of the country, and also because we have a lot of different centers and people that don't think alike or don't work together. So I was very inspired by Carin talk that she said patients were leading the campaign on the very first moment. So we probably need to get more patients on board. And what I've seen so far, that patients and doctors are on the same page as regarding trying to make people aware of what is aortic dissection, and they're very interested and very motivated and very engaged. So we need to probably get more patients to make people more sensitive. And also what we've been thinking is that not only we need the vascular societies on supporting us, but we need the other societies supporting us, because it's not such a challenge for a vascular surgeon to think aorta necessarily, but we have in Brazil about 3,000 vascular surgeons practicing, but we have about 13,000 cardiologists. So if we don't get a cardiologist involved and also radiologists involved, we'll probably we won't spread the word as far as it can get. So what we had this week is a meeting with Vascular Society, and then we can probably have this channel to talk to the other societies that will support us. Here in Brazil, André Brito suggested that we also get radiologists involved, as we don't have many CT scans in the countryside. We have many CT scans in the main cities, but if we can get these radiologists to be sensitive to the problem, we can probably take it even further. So I was very touched also that people in US, they did the papers and and they started with spreading the papers and sending the message through with the patients. So we'll probably try to do that as well.
Brilliant. Grace, thank you. It's I mean, it's early days for Brazil, but we're so glad that you're taking the challenge of rolling out Think Aorta in such a large country to such a large population. And
yes.
You're absolutely right. I think what we found is that a patient's story is very powerful. So if you listen to the podcast, anybody who's watching, the patient stories on there together with the clinicians make a very compelling case. And patients like me who've survived an aortic dissection, we do this because we want there to be more people like us. When you realize that you're in a minority, when you realize that you're one of the lucky few, and when you see other people in your who are in the same situation as you not making it, it's a very powerful motivator for us to do what we do. So I'm sure you will find some patients like us in Brazil who will want to join with you and work on your campaign. You already have the Vascular Society, and I think that's the other end of things, which is to get the senior support from the medical societies. And then you have a movement, you know, with all the right parts of it. Brilliant. Grace, thank you. I'm going to move on to the other side of the Atlantic and to Spain. And Jordi, it's later in Spain, but I know that the Spanish don't go to bed very early. So I'd like to introduce you now to Dr. Jordi Martorell from Barcelona. And Jordi is leading the do we call it Think Aorta Spain or Think Aorta España? What shall we call it, Jordi?
We will see. I don't have any idea yet. We probably have to think of Think Aorta Español probably, because we do have the idea not only to bring this into Spain, but I think to every Spanish-speaking area in the world, because we do believe that everything that is done from Spain influences normally positively on South America, Latin America, Central America. So I think that if the initiative works in Spain, there are odds to make it work in South America and Central America, and even in the more Spanish-speaking areas of the states, like Florida, New Mexico, all these areas that may have more Latin population, and where they've been telling me from the states that it's harder to penetrate into this sub society, this part of the population. So how do we want to do this? Well, Gareth and I talked barely less than a month ago. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Aortic, a company that is dedicated fully to the aorta, and we try to change the paradigm of how we treat aortic dissection. And the first thing that we realized when we were born, is that people do not think aorta, and there's a clear unmet need here. And well, we want to do our part in Spain. We want to help and lead that. Because we feel we owe it to the surgeons that are supporting us, to the patients that are suffering from the disease, and in particular, Spain has a very complicated distribution. Let's say politically, so we have 17 different communities that have 17 different medical systems. So we need to be able to find a way to integrate, and as Carin was saying, the message has to be as simple as possible. And I think the idea of Think Aorta was fantastic. It's clear message, very defined. We have to find a way to transmit it, as Simon was saying, to the paramedics, to the ER, and for me, like the subtitle, CT scan is a must. It's complicated in Spain too, as Dr. Mulatti was saying. Not everyone has a CT scan. And especially in Spain, either obviously the main hospitals have, but not always. And CT scan can not only be the solution, and you have to educate the paramedics and the first responders to be there and be able to derive your patient to the right place. And the idea is not only this, but we want to involve the population, the general population, because the population does not think aorta, and we need to involve the general population. When I explain what an aortic dissection is, people look me like first scared, like, is this going to happen to me? And I see Dr. Youdelman here laughing, but it's really like that, and people get very scared. And I tell them, are you smoking? Are you sedentary? Do you have family history? Then probably not. But you got to check your family history. And I've been receiving questions from people about this. So I think that it's important to involve the general population. And we're going to make an effort this way because there's a very famous anchor woman in Spain whose husband died of an aortic dissection. And we're going to involve that and use this to raise awareness using the TV and like more mass media, and going to try to make our way to that. And let's see if we're able to do something relevant from here to September, trying to put things in motion. And if it works, then we expand the project, as we were saying, to Think Aorta Español.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jordi. That's fantastic, and I'm very inspired just listening to you. And I think not just because of what you're doing in Spain, because the value of a forum like this is we share ideas and we can learn from each other, and we're very much stronger together. And this is why we wanted to get the global community together. Everybody's got a different approach. Everybody's got different ideas. And it's great just to share and inspire each other with this kind of stuff. So I've learned some things tonight, and I've talked to you all individually. So that's brilliant. Thank you so much. We're going to go and take some questions now. And I noticed we've got about 10 minutes left of the hour we scheduled. But if we've got lots of questions, we don't mind going on a bit longer, just to get some of them answered. If we don't answer them all, we can actually respond to people who've posted questions after the event. So we're happy to do some of that as well. But let's transition to the Q&A, and I think Greg's been collecting questions. Who's going to facilitate the answering of them? Well, let's transition to Q&A and we'll talk about it. Greg, would you like to tell the first question, please?
Yes, this is a question for the doctors. Many countries have their control centers telling patients to take aspirin for chest pain prior to the arrival of an ambulance. How big a problem is this for patients who turn out to have an aortic dissection?
I'm happy to address that if I can go first. So there has been multiple studies, and as a heart surgeon, I can tell you we encounter lots of bleeding as a matter of course of what we do. And it has shown that taking of aspirin does not hurt or negatively affect the outcome after any heart surgery. And the reason that that's important is because there's plenty of people who have aortic disease, but who also have coronary artery disease or cerebral vascular disease. And the aspirin will actually help them in the perioperative period, transferring to the hospital, getting prepared for surgery, and then afterwards. So it is not a problem necessarily to take an aspirin per se. And going to the topic, clearly heart disease is far more common for someone with just simple, straightforward chest pain as the cause of it than someone with straightforward chest pain being the cause of it being an aortic problem. But taking the aspirin is not going to change your outcome with respect to a type A or an ascending aortic dissection and the outcome from my operation. It's not going to have any effect. So I do recommend that the aspirin is administered.
That is fantastic. I hope that addressed the question, Viv. That is the only questions we have at this time. So.
Well, thank you, Viv, for that question. I know Viv is a paramedic in Ireland, and I know Simon is chatting to her about some of that too. So thanks, Viv, for joining us. It's great that you were here. I think we've heard a lot this evening from different perspectives. And if you've got questions, we're happy to take them later. We're happy for you to contact us via thinkaorta.net or thinkaorta.us and to get yourself involved that way. I think in terms of one of the questions I'm often asked is, where are you going next? And we do have a Think Aorta world map. And my answer to that is usually, well, we have English-speaking resources at the moment. And so we're very interested in going to all the English-speaking countries on the planet, because we don't have to translate the resources. They're there and they're ready to use. And so it was relatively easy to translate the poster into American and have it rolled out with the endorsement of the American medical societies. So we're interested in Canada, we're interested in Australia and New Zealand, because we think those would be similarly relatively straightforward because we can use the resources. Jordi mentioned that if we translate all the resources into Spanish, that accesses another huge population for us in South America and Central America. And again, that's a very sensible thing to do, because we want to reach the maximum number of people save the maximum number of lives as quickly as possible. So I think our focus is there. If we go, and we obviously we will need to have the poster translate and the resources made into Portuguese for Brazil, which will give us access to Portugal as well, I think. So so that's where we are at the moment. And if we do, if at the end of the year we've got the resources in those 3 languages and active Think Aorta campaigns across those geographies that speak those languages, that's going to be a major presence in the world for Think Aorta. That doesn't mean we're not interested in coming to other countries. If you want to take Think Aorta to your country, talk to us and let's get the ball rolling, and we can help support you. Projects move at different paces, and if we set up an in-country team, then it's fine for lots of countries to be doing this in parallel and taking, going at the pace that is right for their healthcare system. So we can do this together. But that's where we are just now. Ben, you're waving at me. Have you got a question?
There have been a couple of very clear messages that I wanted to address. And, you mentioned it at the outset, which is obviously having a dissection in London is a lot different than having a dissection in the beautiful home where you are currently living, which I did look on the map because I didn't know where it was. And it's a little out in the field, as we like to say. But also the questions that have been raised regarding the ability to rapidly acquire a CT scan. And I thought we would address this just as a topic right now, because I'm sure that there are people listening who will say things like, well, it's certainly good and nice to be able to whisk the patient down the hall for a CT scan, but what if there isn't one in that hospital or in that borough, province, area, or potentially even one anywhere near them in the country? And I will tell you that as an aortic surgeon, I have taken multiple patients to the operating room with a type A dissection, with a ruptured aorta, without any CAT scan imaging. And the way that we can do that is with an algorithm that gives us all the information we would get from a CAT scan. And I'm going to go through them rapidly, which would be, what are the blood pressures in the arms and the legs, all 4 of them? Do we have an ultrasound machine, which to a large degree can represent a surrogate, because you can usually identify problems between the aortic valve and the first branch, which goes to the right arm and the right side of the brain. Many of us have brought patients into the operating room in extremis, not even knowing what they had, only to find out that they had an aortic dissection without any imaging at all. So it's very important that we start to take a little step back from the advancement of the technology that we expect in our hospitals as we drift off into certainly many countries and communities that may not be as prepared for some of this as we are. And I'm not saying we should change the messaging, except to say that there are a lot of ways to handle these emergencies. And I would not want any hospital or any country or any organization to be uninterested in us because we are somehow pushing the CAT scan to the fore as the only way to diagnose these things. I certainly know from firsthand that many emergency departments around the country, and I would love for you to address that directly from Belfast, we have been instituting very aggressive early ultrasound evaluation of patients and identification of things many, many times when the situation that you described, where I think this patient has an aortic dissection, but there's 2 traumas ahead of them. That is an incredibly valuable decision-making tree that needs to occur with the surgeon at the time. And it's very, very important for us to promote that alongside with everything else we're doing, so that these other countries appreciate what they do have and what they can do to help this moving forward.
Thank you. Jill, would you like to comment on that? I mean, CT scanning, in the West is the gold standard for diagnosis. What do you do when the scanner's not available?
Get out. Get out. Do not come in this room.
I think you're muted, Jill. You'd like to take yourself off mute?
That me now?
That's
Can you
good.
hear me now? Okay. Yeah. Well, this is exactly what we're trying to address. We by teaching the clinical examination, as you were saying there, Dr. Youdelman, and the history taken and the clinical examination being the absolute key thing. Yes, we do need to get them to the CT scanner, but in our simulations, I have to be honest with you, we've always got them to the CT scanner in the end. But you raise a very good point, and it is something that I will discuss with my colleagues, because actually it's a really good point, and especially if you're moving into new areas which don't have the same facilities that we have in the West. So yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So yeah, so certainly there will be countries watching where CT scanners are not as prevalent as they are in some of our countries, you know, let's engage and let's work out what is the right approach for Think Aorta in those situations. The need is still there. Now there are countries as well where the problem is more acute and there isn't a life-saving surgical center nearby to take the patient to. And I know, for example, in India, there are centers now beginning, you know, to do some very good aortic surgery, but by no means across the whole country. So we're happy to talk about your individual in-country challenges and work out what it's right to do with Think Aorta in your healthcare system. That's the key message here. So thank you for that. Good. Greg, have we any other questions come in? Otherwise, we'll wrap up here.
We do have additional questions. We have a question from Amanda. This one would be for the doctors as well. Which beta blocker is best indicated for aortic dissection?
You're on mute, Ben. If you take yourself off mute, I'm very happy for you to answer.
Yes, there is a tremendous discussion about this on a regular basis, and I will leave it as a very simple thing that right now on the market we have no fewer than 5 or 6 beta blockers that I can think of that are available that we use on a routine basis, and we adjust the choice based on the patient's innate blood pressure, and we adjust the choice based on the patient's stability on that drug and what other medications that they need. There is no great beta blocker. All there is the overwhelming desire to have a patient's resting heart rate be around 70 and the patient's average blood pressure to be around 70. I tell people that because it's easy to communicate, 70, and if you can do that, it doesn't matter how you get there.
Okay, thank you.
Fantastic. Our next question is from our very own Robert Glass. He is a board member with Think Aorta US. I'm assuming this question is probably best aimed at Simon. Is paramedic education transferable across the globe? Is there a blueprint from the UK we can use here in the US?
Yeah, so in terms of globe, that would very much depend on your health system and how your pre-hospital services are set up. So within the UK, what I've implemented is a regional tool. So the core lecture that I deliver is universal and can be done in each region. But then there are certain things like obviously what centres you go to and pathways are available will change depending on the region. So obviously I work in the east of England, where that may be different in the north or down in the southwest in terms of what centres you go to. So the kind of the short answer is the core kind of education can be transferable. So what I have as part of my session is obviously like key risk factors, symptoms, and obviously they're not, you know, they're not a complete list, but common key themes that, you know, it's just enhancing their understanding and their knowledge depth. Because what I found, especially in the UK, is that these kind of conditions weren't really discussed in education. There was a lot on sepsis, there was a lot on like MRIs and cardiac conditions, but actually dissection was almost like a side note, like, oh, by the way, there is things called aortic aneurysms and dissections, and then that was it. So the answer really, from my point of view, is that there is core things, but there is also regional and I assume global changes depending on the healthcare setup. But we could definitely sort kind of the core package out and obviously send over to various countries, and they just need to be tweaked.
Yeah. So it's customized, I think. Just like the poster, it can be customized for the local healthcare system. Yeah.
I have a question for Simon, if I may.
Yeah.
Simon, is family medical history part of your initial evaluation in the field with, obviously, patients? And my side note is, I always find it funny all through my medical training that you wind up with a patient at the bedside from paramedics who've rushed them in, usually because they were with all of their family members. And the first question I ask them is, what's the family medical history after I've gotten through the other stuff? And there's no one there to answer it. So I always thought that the paramedics were actually a great resource to find out that information. And then I found out that it's not that common. So I was curious if it's common in the UK to ask that question.
So in the UK, I would say that depends on clinician and obviously your experience level. I personally have quite a thorough approach, so I will go through everything from family history, drug history, social history, anything that will build that picture. But in the initial training, they do include it, but there's not a lot of focus on, I'd say, the family history. It's very much, do a time critical A to E assessment, make sure all the ABCs are fine, and then you would do obviously like the drug history. But in terms of family history, that is more of an add-on, I would say, rather than a part of the core assessment. But I agree with you, Ben. Actually, like if you think of the paramedics, what I like to say to the students and the clinicians I educate on the subject as well is, paramedics and technicians and pre-hospital staff will often see these patients in their truest form as well. Often we treat them en route, and when they get to the ED, that's almost like that they look a bit better. And sometimes then obviously when the ED then prioritise them, it's almost like a false picture that we've given them. Obviously sometimes they don't get wrong, they still look very, very unwell, but we almost see them sometimes in their truest form, which I think is really important to get that across as well. And I've had numerous discussions with ED doctors, and what we need to be doing as pre-hospital clinicians is almost serving this on a plate and saying, like, these are the risk factors I've found. I've got an ADDRS score of 3 out of 3, and if there's a facility that's got a CT, great, that's where they should be heading. But that obviously comes with experience and knowledge, and that's what I'm trying to get out there.
Great, thank you, Simon. Good.
Fantastic. Our next question comes from Dan Burgess, and I would say it's probably Gareth. You can probably answer. Any of the country leads could probably answer this. There are medical teams and countries that are enthusiastic about Think Aorta, and also patients from the same country too, but they aren't connected and don't know each other. How can we facilitate them finding each other?
Good. I think this is one of the roles of Think Aorta, which it is a banner under which patients and relatives and medical teams come together. So one of the reasons we want to put this umbrella out there, and I always say when we're setting up an in-country team, where's the Patients Association? Where are the medics? Where are the relatives? Can we get them all in the same room to talk about doing a campaign? Because that's the recipe for a good campaign. So I think there's been a tremendous amount of work done over the recent years, and I know my good friend Timo Söderlund in Sweden has launched the sort of 19th September Global Aortic Dissection Awareness Movement, and there were patient-led activities in about 20 countries around the world. So I think we're in a position, and Timo was a great help to Think Aorta, and I know he's a big supporter. We're in a good position to connect medical teams with patients in some of those countries where we have the networks. That said, if you are a clinician working in aortic dissection, presumably you have got patients, presumably some of them have survived. Now, it's a change in the relationship, because you have to reach out to them and say, come and work with me because I want to do this thing. And Ben, you've done a bit of that with Aortic Bridge in New York, haven't you? Do you want to just comment on that?
That's exactly why I've just sort of raised my hand. I have to say there's two issues here, and one is that clinicians like myself have found two interesting things. One, it's incredibly challenging to get involved with patients in anything but a formal clinical way because they're afraid of somebody bringing them aside and asking them personal or medical questions. And they feel uncomfortable, and so they just avoid it. The second thing is that if you can figure out a way to do it, you actually have the most satisfying job in the world, which is you bring these people who you've played this incredibly important role a little closer to you, and in some respects, even closer to your family. And we did that with an organization we call Aortic Bridge, simply because we live in New York and there's a lot of bridges, and I thought it was a good connection. And what we did was have an annual walk. We had quarterly or more frequent meetings, and we didn't just invite the patients and the families, but we also invited some of the other people involved in their care. We've invited the nurse practitioners, the nurses, the office staff. We've invited the psychiatrists, and I can go off on a long tangent, which I won't, so don't worry, about psychiatry early involvement with aortic disease and all of the work that we're doing in that area. But really the idea is to bring the patients a little closer. And I can't say that it's the right thing for a lot of practitioners who don't have the ability to navigate this very complicated relationship, but that when you find people in our Think Aorta world who are able to navigate having a relationship that goes beyond the clinical relationship with patients and family members, they will have a much more satisfying career. It will allow us to promote Think Aorta in a very complete way. And it will allow us to avoid what we have seen, which is separate messaging, separate dividing, and not a cohesive, clean message that we can all push together out into the world.
Interestingly, that we in the UK found that our aortic dissection awareness day events started to bring together clinicians and patients in an informal setting where they could network. And it wasn't for everybody, but over a few years, it built trust between a group of clinicians and a group of patients and relatives, sufficient for them to transcend that normal relationship and start working together as humans on the same team. And we value those relationships very highly. And you can sense from the group that we've got here tonight, this is how we work as Think Aorta. We are a group of people, and some of us are doctors, and some of us are patients, and some of us are other things. And actually, we're a group of people who have a common cause. We want to save the lives of patients having an aortic dissection, and we've all got something we bring to the party. And that's the recipe for success. Carin, do you want to comment on that? You've got your hand up.
Yes, speaking a little bit similarly to what Ben was talking about, I wear multiple hats. So not only do I wear the hat of working with Think Aorta US, but there's also another nonprofit organization in the US that's called Aortic Hope. And what we are the post-diagnosis patient advocacy and support group, not only for patients, survivors, but their caregivers as well. So what we're able to do is really convey to patients and survivors the importance of being your own advocate, starting that conversation and bridging any kind of gap between yourself and your practitioner. And in doing that, we've been able to cross-promote and support Think Aorta really seamlessly, because that's what we're looking for as far as relationships in that organization as well. So that's where I think if you do utilize your patients to help you with the messaging, I think you're going to find it's a lot easier. I have not encountered any patient who then presents this campaign to their physician that is being turned away. I have not had a patient that said their physician is not interested in helping to promote this, because we all know it's a win-win in the end. So you will be amazed how many survivors want to communicate this, especially those that might have had a little bit of a misdiagnosis or not necessarily a timely diagnosis. And the repercussions, as Ben talked about, the psychological repercussions, the PTSD that follows, the way that trickles down into the family, they are eager to see this not happen, and they're eager to talk about it. So utilize your patients to help you with this messaging. It will become an instant way to get it out. But I really don't think it's a problem in bridging the two. It just starts with allowing those patients and survivors to feel empowered to have the conversation.
There's one more point of connection, and we don't talk about it a lot because it's quite sensitive, but I know a number of clinicians who are motivated to do Think Aorta because they carry with them the memory of a patient that they've lost. And those people are, real champions who want to prevent that from ever happening again to either them or their colleagues. And on the other side of the coin, we in our patient group have quite a large number of bereaved relatives who have lost someone who has been misdiagnosed or has had a delay in reaching surgery. And it's very moving to see those two people connecting over those feelings of loss, which are very deep, and being motivated to do Think Aorta. And yeah, I've been very moved to see those connections happening. So at the end of the day, we're just human, and it's our humanity that compels us to do this. And we can set aside our professional boundaries. Good. I think on that note, I'm going to wrap proceedings up. And if we haven't answered your question, we will do so after the session, because we're about 20 minutes over the hour that we said we would schedule. For those of you watching, I am so happy that you joined us tonight. I hope you feel you've learned more about Think Aorta. I hope you feel inspired to take what you've learned and go away and do something with it, either where you work or in your country. We're here to support you. We will help you in every way we can to make a change that saves the lives of aortic dissection patients. Ben, Carin, any of the other panel members, would you like to say anything before we close?
Well, I'm so excited. I'll say that. I am. This is we were excited when we first took this on just from our country's perspective, but to realize that the dream of seeing this go global, it's exciting, it's overwhelming. I'm anxious. I want to just wake up and have it be way underway. I think one of the most exciting things that I was always so interested in when it came to Think Aorta was that it was a campaign. It will always be a campaign. And, those of us who might have this as a nonprofit organization, it has never been about money. There's really no amount of money that's going to change mindset. It is about educating and providing the awareness. And as you say, Gareth, it's all what's in your heart and your soul and what drives you. And it's all about passion. And it's exciting to see all of the passion in all of your eyes and in your messaging and how you're going to go about unraveling this and unrolling this in your countries. So I know from the U.S., we look forward to being a partner with all of you in the future.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's been a great evening. We will do this again in order to keep the global team connected and share our ideas and inspiration and motivate each other. But in the meantime, let's take Think Aorta and use it to start changing the world. Thank you very much indeed.